Hello! Welcome to Billy's Books. Today I'm going to do Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. Project Hail Mary. The little word is project, the big words are Hail Mary. This is a science fiction book. It's written by the same guy that wrote The Martian, which was a famous and popular movie. The book was popular too. I never read it. But I read this one, or am reading, and I like it. It's pretty fun. It's science fiction, but it's like true science fiction in the old sense, like Asimov and Heinlein, where it's not just like a space opera like Star Wars, but in fact is kind of fiction based on science. Our hero, Dr. Ryland Grace, the book begins with him waking up and not knowing where the heck he is. Well, he's in a spaceship, it turns out. And it takes him a while to figure that out because there's no windows. And one big hint that the one thing about this book that's a little bit of a giveaway is it has in the front of the book, it has this little illustration of the spaceship. So that kind of takes away some of the mystery of him waking up going, where am I? But there you go. What are you gonna do? Otherwise, I would say this is a really fun book. It's a very science-based book. Our hero, Ryland Grace, Dr. Ryland Grace, is a scientist. So are many of the other characters in this book. He wakes up. Now, he doesn't just wake up in his spaceship and not be able to figure it out. He doesn't know anything. He wakes up with amnesia. He doesn't know who he is. And but he starts using science and math really quickly to start figuring stuff out. So his internal mind says, how do I know all this? How do I know how this chronometer works even though I don't know where I am? And he slowly realizes, using deductive reasoning, that he is a scientist himself, using scientific reasoning. We also find out that he's a scientist because he's kind of nerdy and in a cool, curious sort of way, and he sort of solves things using the scientific method, or at least, using a little bit of abstraction and combining it with a small experimentation. He also figures things out, like, I must be in a rotating vehicle, because he'll just hold something and measure it, and he'll be able to use all the math in his head to figure out spin rates and velocities and all these things so that he can conclude where he is, and he's very good with the numbers and stuff. So basically the scenario is eventually the world is coming to an end and I have to rescue it. There's this stuff called astrophage that he basically names it that, sort of surrounding. There's something blocking the light or sucking up the light of our sun, Sol, right there, making me sweat. And it is slowly taking away all the brightness from the sun, and they predict that within a certain number of years, the sunlight will go down a full 10% at the rate that this astrophage is sucking up the sunlight. And they realize, well, we cannot stand, the Earth will not be able to handle a reduction of 10% sunlight. This is a doomsday scenario within just a couple decades. So let's do something about it. So the UN, what happens? I mean, there's such a subliminal message here. There's like, there's this natural catastrophe happening. We've got to work really hard. And in the story, the UN, they all get together and they appoint this woman named Strat. She's given sort of unlimited power to boss anybody in the world around to get this project done, which is figure out how to save the world. And she gets pretty tyrannical and such, and every now and then someone calls on her on it. Now, the funny thing about this scientist, Dr. Ryland Grace, is that it's very much like a science book where he kind of talks pretty glibly and or really out of line to leaders of state. And this woman just kind of really just very oh, well, look at you, aren't you? Do. And it's like, you wouldn't say that to the Secretary of State of Israel, would you? You probably wouldn't be quite that. So anyway, but it's funny. It's a funny book. And, he has all sorts of encounters, and his little side comments are very much like, if other famous scientists, they have a certain sense of humor about them. And this comes through. The scientist humor is is a different one. That's like when you think of nerdy scientists, you think, oh, they sometimes can have quite bawdy sense of humor. The same way you think of like scientists and classical musicians as being really straight-laced. When classical musicians are off stage, they are not straight-laced. They are a bawdy bunch, let me tell you. Pretty much some of them have the same mouths that sailors do that you might expect on a rock and roll ensemble. This is an example of some of the humor that we're involved with. I'm not going to tell you the context because you know me. I try to do as little plot as possible. But here is something from a meeting. I suddenly forgot everything else going on in the room. Oh God, please tell me you understand where the heat goes. I can't figure out what the heck it's doing with the heat energy. We have figured this out, yes, said Dmitri, with lasers. It was a very illuminating experiment. Was that a pun? It was. Good one! We both laughed. Strat glared at us. So that is an example of the kind of scientist humor that you deal with. It's kind of square and inappropriate because this guy, the Dmitri guy, he was like the head of science of Russia, but they hit it off immediately and stuff like that. So astrophage, we mentioned that. That is the stuff that is absorbing the sunlight. It has some interesting properties such that it always stays at like 98 degrees Celsius. It doesn't go up or down. It takes them a while to figure out how that's possible. When they do, they realize that has some interesting engineering implications. Astrophage also, and part of some of that mystery is it stores a lot of energy, so much so that it's sucking up the energy of the sun in such a way that it is able to retain. They're like, how do these little tiny cells hold so much energy? It takes a long time before we find out. The answer is neutrinos. Now you know, neutrinos, subatomic particles. They somehow are able to store energy. Now you know. Anyway, so the spaceship that he's in, he wakes himself up on slowly figures it all out through flashbacks, of course. Many of these scenes I'm telling you are flashbacks to Earth before he got on the spaceship. And stuff like that. He's all alone on this spaceship, so he has to figure everything out. The spaceship is going to Tau Ceti, which is a nearby star to our own Sol. And why do they go to Tau Ceti? Because they see that astrophage is actually surrounding a number. They realize, the astronomers figure out, oh my goodness, this astrophage has been around a number of local stars recently. But for some reason, but for some reason, Tau Ceti is not affected. Why is Tau Ceti not affected? So the spaceship, it goes there to find out how, even though our protagonist does not know why yet. I mean, as I'm still reading, he's still figuring stuff out. And of course, I haven't shot the ending, so I can't accidentally tell you the ending. There are times when it actually seems, considering it's so science-based, it seems a little, at times, unrealistic, maybe to make it more cinematic. Like, he goes in and out of an airlock a couple times to do repairs and other stuff, and he takes off his spacesuit really kind of quickly, and without doing all the checks you might expect, and that strikes me as a little unrealistic, at the same way that you wouldn't talk to the Prime Minister of Israel too glibly. It's like, come on, you would really be more careful with your own life, I think. Just to give you a sense of, it's not all fun and games, obviously, because the end of the world is coming. So I'm going to read you one more quote that I thought was kind of moving. It is from a flashback back when he was still on Earth. They were conducting experiments on an aircraft carrier. The shockwaves should be here in 10 minutes or so. It'll just sound like thunder, though. He looked down at the carrier deck. Strat put her hand on his shoulder. You did what you had to. We're all doing what we have to. He buried his face in his hands and cried. So there are serious moments. They have to make some pretty big sacrifices to save the world. They have to do things that normally you wouldn't do and would be criminal to save the world. And this guy is mourning one of those things. One of those terrible things they have to do that he's actually responsible for doing, even though it goes against his fundamental nature to do it. He understands why he has to do it, and it breaks his heart and many of those around him. Anyway, so I'm really enjoying this book. It's a real page turner. It's one of those books where, like, hey, I've got to go somewhere else, but I want to keep reading. It's one of those books. So I would say, in that sense, it's actually maybe a better book than a number of the Star Wars books I've reviewed. Oh, ho, ho, ho! The guys on the back here, famous people like Brandon Sanderson, George R. R. Martin, Ernest Cline, Tim Peake, and Blake Crouch, all say really, really good things about this book. Some are saying it's the best book they read this year. Maybe. I can tell you I'm really enjoying it, and I laugh out loud a lot. So I'm going to have to recommend it highly. Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary, a scientific science fiction book. If you can't do, review.
What you gonna do when the satellites drop? When the satellites drop? When the satellites drop?